You have to press the button there to say you give permission.
It says got it.
Got it. You got it. Hello, everybody. This is Abby, and I'm talking to Marie. And Maria and I have talked already before, and we had so much fun. I managed to drag her out of her busy day and get her to talk to me again. So what we thought we'd talk to you about today is fear as the virus.
Yeah, and how fear deeply impacts us in how we go about our daily lives, in the decisions we make or don't make, and how fear can really freeze us. When you had mentioned the topic, hi everybody, by the way, Marie's jumping straight in, no fear.
That's the way we do it, yeah.
That's the way we do it. When you mentioned the topic about fear and fear as a virus, I totally relate to that for lots of different reasons, not just what we've all gone through in the last couple of years. And I'll talk about that too. But I have a very personal and deep understanding of fear. Fear that I would attach to almost debilitating anxiety at times. The fear to do the wrong thing, the fear to say the wrong thing, the fear to make the wrong decision, the fear not to people please, the fear to be not accepted. So it's very personal to me as well. I have a very deep personal understanding of just how damaging fear is. I mean, as you and I both know, Abby, fear is also, there's a healthy fear, you know, there's a normal level of fear, like there is with every human emotion and experience that we have. But it's when it becomes overwhelming, or it's when it stops you from, it's when it stops you. There's no end to that sentence, it's when it stops you. And even now in my work, I'm a psychotherapist, as you know, and I work with a huge group of psychotherapists here at Glosna House. And the increase in the amount of people who are contacting us, and they're contacting us saying they are suffering from extreme anxiety.
Yeah.
So the increase in people contacting that with that as their, as we would call in our terms, their presenting issues, has just increased so much. And I know, coming from somebody who grew up almost on a foundation of fear, that having experienced what I experienced over the last couple of years with the pandemic, with the lockdowns, with all that kind of stuff, and all the fear that was shoved down my throat through the television, through the radio, through social media. I was deeply impacted because I was already coming from a shaky place where fear is concerned at times. You know, it's like our triggers, isn't it? It's, you know, it's rubbing salt in wounds that I have that aren't healed.
I think they were depending on that, though.
Well, of course they were. And thankfully I found my way out of the fear in that respect. But it's like with fear and with what I'm seeing in not just people professionally or who contact our center, but friends of mine, family members, the increase in people's anxiety, the increase in people's fear to make a decision. Because I also believe that for so many of us, we felt a lot of the decisions were taken away from us, where our power was taken away from us. And I know we can look at, but it's only if we give it. But there was a time where I felt things were being taken from me. I remember being in my car that I work for to buy and to purchase and to tax and to insure and to be a completely law-abiding citizen in, having my child in the back seat in her child seat, and I was driving her to I think it was, whether it was a Montessori, I can't remember, somebody to look after her so I could work to pay my bills. And I remember being stopped by the guards, and I remember being asked where I was going, what I was doing. And it's a moment I will never forget because I froze in fear.
Yeah.
I literally froze in fear. And I can even feel a little bit of anxiety coming up as I say that. I can feel it in my stomach. I was so shocked that in such a short period of time, that's what it had come to. That I, as a human being on this planet, could not just get into my car and go about my daily life without being interrogated. And I felt really afraid in that moment. And I felt really afraid that day. And I felt afraid for my future. And I felt afraid for my child. And I felt afraid for what was next. You know, was I going to be put in a cage? You know, what was next? Because so many things happened that we were told were never going to happen. But it all happened, you know, and it exasperated my already, it exasperated my anxiety. And given that so many people deal with fear and so many people deal with anxiety, could we say that we were easy targets? I don't know. Could we say that it was those who already had a foundation of fear or anxiety were more deeply impacted? I don't know. I know I was very badly impacted. And I know then I was, for example, just that example, I then became afraid to get into my car. Was I going to be stopped? Who was going to ask me questions? Although I would be seen as quite an open book. You know, I tend to spill my guts probably too much. But anyway, there are certain situations, like I don't like to be asked questions. That sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? I'm very open to sharing how I feel. I'm very open to sharing how I think. But I certainly don't want to be interrogated or feel that I must reply in order to be able to get about my day. So
you see, asking questions is very different to being interrogated.
Yeah.
And as you're talking there, I'm feeling the fear surfacing up, the actual feeling of the energy of fear, which, you know, is something that cascades like the snowball rolling down the hill.
Yeah.
The more fear that's out in the world, it picks up more fear and picks up more fear and picks up more fear. And then people feel more fear. And it's a cascade that more and more people are feeling more fear. And it leads to that freeze response, which is what you said, where people, so you're talking about people who are already vulnerable, who are already dealing with a certain level of anxiety every day. And when they're increasing the amount of fear that they're feeling, then those people who aren't already vulnerable, the people who would not have, let's say, low level constant anxiety, but might get flares or flashes of anxiety, then they start to feel afraid too, because they're feeling the fear from everybody else. And then they, you know, increase that. And then the people who don't get the flashes of anxiety start to feel anxiety because there's so much fear around. It's thick in the environment, it's thick in the air, and everybody feels it. Nobody knows why. And that's kind of, you know, and if you can't talk about it, there's no way to talk, then you think it's all you. You don't realize that you're feeling the fear of the community, you're feeling the fear of your family, you're feeling the global fear. And then on top of that is the layer of fear that the animals would use as a healthy fear to say there's something wrong, we have to get the fuck out of here.
Yeah. And that's what I mean by a healthy level of fear, you know, and that's, you know, we need that. But there was nothing healthy, certainly. I'll speak only for myself. There was nothing healthy about the level of fear I experienced over the last couple of years.
But you don't have to speak only for yourself. You've met so many people and you've done so much work.
Oh yeah, I've met so many people. Of course, I have through my work, and particularly, and you know, I think this is just it's a sign of the times. Unfortunately, is teenagers.
Yeah.
Teenagers were absolutely hammered. Their social lives were taken away from them. Their educational lives were taken away from them. They were often literally felt trapped in a home, and perhaps with parents or guardians or whoever also trapped there because they were working from home, or everything changed overnight. Literally everything changed overnight. And as we know, being a teenager is pretty tough going anyway. It's a really challenging time anyway. I can't imagine being a teenager and having gone through that. I went through it. I'm laughing. I'm just thinking of something my 5-year-old said to me the other day. I went through it as an old lady. Mom, you're an old lady, aren't you? No, Marley, I'm not. But, you know, with teenagers, gosh, they really, really suffered.
You know, I've met a couple of psychotherapists at an event recently who work with teenagers specifically. And they say that the teenagers they're working with have lost so much confidence that they're still wearing a mask in school so they can hide their face.
Yeah. Yeah. I've seen it. I've seen it. And it's so sad to me. It's really sad to me. And, you know, there's just, like, we're talking about fear, we're talking about anxiety, which aren't nice topics to talk about. I mean, when I talked about that time where I was stopped and interrogated as to what I was doing in my own car, with my own child, going about my own business, it's, I feel that fear when I talk about it. It still comes back to me because I'm not over it, Abby. I'm not over it, you know. I'm not over what I went through. It's not like I remember, is it meme or mem? What's the way to say it? Anyway, the meme memes that come up on social media. I remember reading something and it said, and I just totally related to it. And I don't know if I'm going off course here, but look, you can delete this part if I am.
No, it's all good.
I remember reading a Facebook meme that said, yesterday, now this isn't verbatim because I'll probably throw in my own tuppence worth as well, but it said, yesterday, I was not allowed to sit in your restaurant and have my breakfast and drink my cup of tea. But today I can, so it's grand. Well, actually, it's not grand. It's not grand at all. That really spoke to me and for me. It was like, okay, everybody, you're not a leper anymore. You're allowed back into society. You're allowed to do this. You're allowed to do that. And I was like, I don't want to now.
Yeah, but it doesn't feel like that. It feels like you're allowed to do this, you're allowed to do that until we decide you're not. That's what it feels like.
Yeah.
They haven't said that. It's like, look what we know what we can do. We know we can do this because we just did this.
That's what frightens me. So we talk about fear. That frightens me. That it's like, it's boundaries, isn't it? It's, if we look at it from a therapeutic point of view, not that there's anything therapeutic about it, but if we look at boundaries, if you look at raising young children, which I'm learning the hard way, when you look at raising young children and them pushing boundaries, they will keep pushing boundaries to figure out what you will allow and what you won't allow.
Well, look, you said it yourself. You felt like you were being put in a cage.
Yeah, I was put in a cage.
And then how big is the cage? The cage is your 15-minute city. There's your cage.
Remember that. Yeah.
So that hasn't happened yet, but there's the feeling of it. And the next pandemic, they're always talking about that and a new variant. I saw one for a new variant. But energetically, it's what you put your energy into is what you see more of in your life.
True. Absolutely true. You talk a lot about raising your vibration. Okay. And years ago, I wouldn't really have got that. I didn't get it. Okay. I understand the concept, but I didn't get it. And more recently, I've been really looking at that because I needed to. And I think it's a good place to bring this in as well, because when we talk about fear and you talk about the snowball effect and you talk about how it kind of, even when I think of the snowball effect, I almost feel like I'm at the bottom of this hill and this massive snowball is coming for me, you know. That's how big it was. But with the fear, and it's like when it's coming at you from all angles, I literally felt at times under attack, whether it was all these numbers up on the news, whether it was social media showing me pictures, whether it was family members and friends telling me that I would be the cause of people's death. Yeah,
Yeah.
whatever it was, the level of fear would increase and increase and increase. So I would make decisions based on fear. I would walk about my day fearful. And I think as well, one of the worst things that fear can do to a person is shut them down so that they no longer connect and they're no longer part of something. You know, you can go so insular because you're afraid, and you're afraid that you will not be accepted. And I think ultimately as human beings, we want to be accepted. You know, we need our tribe. We need to be connected. We really need that. And it was hard to find that though, because we're all isolated.
But it's still hard. It's still hard. You know, and when you're talking about fear and how it shuts you down and how you're not allowed to speak. And now I'm looking at all these sudden deaths. And how you're not allowed to say what's the cause of this, why they're not investigating, why the journalists are continuing to push their agendas. Let's pretend everything didn't happen. And I was talking to a friend last night and I said to him, there seems to be a slow slide of people who were strong in the face of that snowball, who stood in front of their children and said, you can kill me and leave the kids alone. They're starting to slide back into thinking that nothing ever happened, that everything's okay.
False sense of security.
They've changed gear, they've geared down again. And my worry would be that everything we're told to look at over here at this and look over there at that, that we're missing what's going on. So this is why I wanted you to talk about this with me. This is why I feel it's so important for people to meet in real life, and we're going to meet in real life tomorrow.
Yes, tomorrow.
And why
we've met in real life before. We're going to meet in real life again
tomorrow. But you know why we need to do that? We need to meet on the ground. So anyone who's listening to this, if there's anyone that you haven't met in a while, that you need to meet in real life, have a conversation offline, or as my other friend, off the line, a real conversation in real life with everything switched off. Know who your community is, know who your network is, because what happened in the last 3 years was that we know who everybody is, but people like you know, people like me, we face this alone.
Yeah.
But when we found each other and discovered that we were thinking the same way, we were on Messenger all the time, and we were
that really helped. That really helped. Yeah.
So when you have your strong network around you now, and you know who your friends are now, they're never going to go away. You know, but you have to make the effort. You have to show up. So I bought a ticket for an Irish event that's happening in July 2023, and it's an expensive ticket, but I appreciate that these things cost a lot of money to put on, and I'm making the effort, and I'm bringing my husband with me. We're going to go down to it in Mullingar. So, and again, as all of these events are, we don't know exactly where in Mullingar it's going to be. It's going to be somewhere in Mullingar, because there's going to be some people who are going to say, these guys are dangerous, they're going to kill everybody, so you have to not allow them get together. There's fear, people afraid to go together in groups, people afraid to get together and talk. And then I had another friend of mine this morning say that let's just say that she's not awake. She's lovely, good heart, beautiful, beautiful woman who realizes now the implications of not being allowed to speak and how that's going to affect her children if there's no free speech. And it's starting to really scare her, because she's an author. She writes books, and people who are writing books are getting told what to say and what not to say. And apparently, which I haven't heard, something about To Kill a Mockingbird or some other book is about to be censored. They're censoring the Roald Dahl books. They've republished books. You know, The Little Mermaid, I think they just made it again, and they changed everything. They're changing it. And it's like they're trying to erase things that they don't want us to remember. Stories of courage. I got in touch with
love Roald Dahl.
So my son was doing the Leaving Certificate during the pandemic, but the restrictions were in place to allow people who'd had the needlecraft, for a way of saying it, to go into the theatre and watch the play with limited numbers of audiences. And you know how they were leaving the seats open, and so he wasn't going to be allowed to go. And so I wrote to the school, and I wrote to the theatre, and I said, you put on plays about justice, you put on plays about equality, about insurmountable pain and people overcoming adversity, and yet you're doing this very thing you know, and how do you feel about that? That's a typical
Yeah.
psychotherapist question. So they put on a show for kids doing the Leaving Cert who didn't have it because of that. You see, so if you don't ask, you don't get. You have to push
You
back.
know what you said there, because of that. I think that's a really important, I don't want to jump over that, and I'll tell you why. It shows you what one person can do. It shows you what one person can do, because in the midst of fear, you can feel so isolated, Abby, and you can feel so alone, and you can feel sometimes hopeless that, oh, sure, what could I do anyway? I'm just this person over here. Well, look what you did. I also, one of my favorite letters of all time is the one you wrote to the TV licensing people. Again, you know, it's about recognizing that we have the power within us. We have the power within us to stand up and be counted. We have the power within us to have our voices heard. I'm not trying to drown out anybody, Abby. I'm not. I will listen to everybody and what they have to say, whether I agree with them or not. Some people I might listen to as much, but but equally, and we talk about equality and we talk about justice, everybody's voice needs to be heard. I mean, like, you only have to look at all the censorship that takes place on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook. I mean, how many times have you been shadow banned? And what's the new thing? You know, if you haven't been shadow banned, have you anything honest to say anyway?
Have you seen Billboard Chris? He's very inspiring, and he's just one person.
And see that he's just one person, and that's
He's
the
just
point.
one
It's
person.
it's one person that can make a big difference. And then it's like all these one persons, you know, you put us together, and you know, magic can happen. And we really need to, sometimes for my own well-being, Abby, I just blank it all. I just say, no, I'm not listening to it today. I'm not dealing with it today. I don't want it in my life today. I want to shut everything down around me. So it's just me, my child, my dogs, my cat, my partner. You know, I'm just, Marley's obsessed with snails, obsessed. So we have like the snail hotel. We have snail everything. And I have to be very careful because we have the snail bedroom now in the house. She loves snails. She's always loved snails and bees and all kinds of creatures. And I hope she always has that. You know, she's a real love of anything and everything that moves. That reminds me of a very funny story that some people would be afraid of. So on the subject of fear, outside my back door, my back door is like those patio doors, you know, the ones I'm making gestures here at my hands, which will mean nothing when people are listening to this. So anyway,
like
I have
saloon
patio
doors.
Yeah, that open out. There you go, that open out. And during the winter and during the summer, I love feeding the birds. I have like millions of bird feeders. I think my shopping bill for the birds is almost expensive as my shopping bill for the humans in the house. So I love getting all the different kinds of bird seeds to attract different types of birds. So anyway, myself and Marley are sitting on the ground, on the tiles, in the kitchen, and the bird feeders are all out at the back door, and all the birds are there. And we're saying, oh, look at this bird, look at that bird. And then I got up from the ground to go over to do whatever, I don't know, make a cup of tea or something. And I could just hear Marley take a huge big in breath, and she went, thank you so much, Mommy. Thank you so much. And I said, what? You got us a rat.
Oh my God.
And I said, what? And by the way, we live in the countryside, and there was this rat had run up one of the bird feeders and had his two little mitts.
Oh
So
my
cute.
goodness.
On one of the fat balls, you know, having a good munch. And sure, Marley was delighted. And she's saying, what will we call him, Mom? Can we bring him in?
But you see, that's the fearless, isn't it? She hasn't
This
been
goes
told
back
to
to the
be, she
point.
hasn't been told to be afraid of a rat.
No, exactly. And I think, you know, sometimes, well, I can only speak for myself and my limited experience as a parent. But because I was afraid of so many things, not creatures, by the way, just life in general, the big stuff. I always loved creatures. and still do, I always am very careful not to put my fear on my child, you know, not to there's plenty of madness I am passing down, but the fear I'm really trying desperately not to.
Don't be desperate about anything.
I suppose not to be desperate, but to be accepting that I do struggle with the fear, and I would like for her not to struggle as much as I do with the fear. So with animals, I have every animal, every creature is like, wow, look at that woodlouse. Oh, look at the beetle. Isn't his bark so shiny? What will we call him? Is his name Roger? You know, we just have the crack with it. And on the point of fear and how fear is taught a lot of the time, we love spiders in our house. It's like, wow, look at the spider made. Do you see the gorgeous web and all of that? And Marley would be fascinated with spiders. And, you know, you wouldn't want to be afraid of spiders. You actually come over with them in her hand. I'm not afraid of them. Going, look, it's Maureen.
She has great name choices.
She has great names. But more recently now, when she sees a spider, she's like, ah, it's a spider. And I was saying, that's Maureen. Why are you screaming at Maureen? And it's because there's kids in her class who are afraid of spiders. So she's learning, you know, like we talked about the snowball, that fear is being spread. And there's a very small example. But that's what happens, isn't it? It's that fear.
It's intrinsic. It gets in there and it just grows within. That's a beautiful example.
And it's, you know, there it is on a smaller scale. And if you look, like we were really, I would almost absolutely bombarded with fear-based propaganda for so long.
I think even to a point where we didn't even realize what it was coming up to it. When you look at the way we were living before, we opened our eyes to how we were being spoken to.
Yeah.
It's like being herded like cattle by the messages and the signaling. A little bit over here, a little bit over there, you know, shifting you. And then they just try to move you a little bit further, a little bit, you know, using the same. But some of us saw what was going on.
Yeah.
So I think for people who've been listening, they can probably relate to a lot of this and feeling the fear. And I had said earlier about what you put energy into, you see more of in your life. So we need to realize that we're not cattle or sheep, and that we're not penned in to the degree that some people think that we are, and that we can take the reins back of our own lives and choose more deliberately and get the power back. Yeah, because I think what you said there earlier, today I'm not going to look at this, today I'm not going to do that. You're not ignoring it. You're not saying it's not there. You're just closing the door on it and saying, I need a break from it.
Yeah.
But you know yourself, when you do that, it takes a lot of energy just to keep those shutters down. And so for people who don't say, okay, today I'm going to look at it, today I need to know what's going on, they don't do that. The amount of energy that you would spend shutting fear away from yourself to just get on with your life and not feel it builds up and builds up and builds up until you become weaker, and the fear becomes like this Pandora's box that you've buried somewhere in your psyche. And you're too afraid to even look at the size of the box because you've been putting so much energy into it that you're imagining that it's 20 times bigger than it probably is. You know, that's that saying, the fear of fear itself, you know, is the fear of fear is the biggest fear of all. And that's debilitating too.
It is debilitating.
But we own that, each and every one of us. So I say to people, if there's something there that you are genuinely afraid of, then it's always going to be there. If it's a real thing, there are people you can reach out to who can help you with it. There are things that you can do in your life to work with it, to appreciate your fear. Like, I'll give you a brilliant example. I have a client who has a daughter with disabilities who's an adult. So my client would be in her 60s, her daughter be in her 40s. So the fear is, what happens when I die to my daughter? That's a real, genuine fear. So you can actually sit down and make a plan.
Yeah.
And then you can say, every time the fear rises up, you could say, I've made a plan. Mm-hmm. And here's the thing, you can even make a crap plan. You can make a really crappy plan. And you can say, I've made a plan. And then you improve the plan and improve the plan and improve the plan. And then suddenly then you're not thinking about the fear. You're not thinking about any of that. You're thinking about the plan. And you're making it the best plan that you can make because you stop feeling the fear around it.
The plan is really important.
So making a crappy plan is a really, really good first step.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I think it's important that you highlighted their real fears, because that's a real fear. That's a real fear. And I think it's so important that we recognize it's not that fear is bad. It's nothing is that simple, obviously. But then we have the imagined fears.
Yes. Yes. And I think even changing a real fear to an actual concern. I'm concerned for what's going to happen to my daughter when I die, takes the edge off.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, again, everything is our perception, isn't it, Abby? And how we're looking at things.
Because you can shut everything off, and then you can be worrying and fretting and worrying about the stuff that you're not allowing yourself see. And then you just don't want to let, and then you freeze within that boundary wall. And then you'll never leave the house. And there are people who are doing that right now. And that's heartbreaking.
Yeah, there's more people than people realize who are prisoners. And they're prisoners to fear.
Yeah.
They're complete prisoners to fear because they have been absolutely hammered with this snowball that we talk about. My dad is in his 80s, and he would be a very independent, anti-establishment person. I would have grown up in a household whereby religion wouldn't have been religion wouldn't have been a priority. Religion would have been frowned upon. He was anti-establishment, he was anti-everything. I don't know how best to put it. And he was very much his own person and did his own thing, and really built a life through great adversity. And I was shocked by how much the fear got him.
Yeah.
I was shocked by how much the fear got him. He would have always been somebody who would have encouraged me and my brothers and sisters almost to go against the grain. You know, if we got in trouble in school, my dad would be more thinking, what have the school done wrong? You know?
But that's wonderful for you.
You know, and that always encouraged us to, you know, to go against the grain, to not be afraid of authority. Because I know my mother, she would have been very afraid of authority. She would have grown up kind of fearing the local priest and going to hell and all these different things. Whereas my father would have been the absolute opposite, not to allow the fear and not to allow stories to prevent you from living your life. But I suppose when you put somebody in front of a TV long enough and hammer them with all these terrible things that are going to happen.
Look at you with the policeman.
Yeah. And I think of all the time, I haven't thought about this in a long time. I don't mean everything that happened, but I mean being stopped by the police. I haven't thought about that in a long time. And when I said that out loud, I felt anxiety rise up in my chest, because I would remember being in a line of people waiting for my turn to be interrogated, you know, waiting for my turn, Abby. And, you know, there'd be however many cars in front of me. And even just the battle that would go on inside me saying, who the fuck do they think they are interrogating me?
Oh, and it's funny, I was on the bus and I went beyond my 5 kilometers to get to the Botanic Gardens because I needed to be near nature during the lockdown. And I saw a big Garda van, the one that they would use with no windows to take the people away in.
The Mariah.
I started getting really scared. And then I heard this voice inside my head, your ancestors fled from Russia, from the bad guys who wanted to kill them. And you're worried about going on a bus to the fucking park. You know, and I just got a wave of that. So there's the ancestral fear coming in there too.
But it's also, like, you know, it's that thing where you look back. Yeah, you look back and you say, what the hell? But I also need to remind myself during those times, I felt very alone, Abby. Am I the only person who thinks this is outrageous? Am I the only person who is not going to get involved in anyone coming at me with their trials or whatever they want to call it? Am I the only person? Because it feels that way. And even more so if we look at, you know, when anxiety hits, when fear hits, it's so important to connect. But usually what the fear does is it freezes us so that we don't. And we need to fight that, literally.
Yeah, totally.
To connect, you know, to connect to other people, to remind us that we're not alone, that we are connected. Had I known back then that I wasn't alone, I probably would have come to my senses.
Look, it was, and when you talk
Faster.
about your father, right?
Yeah.
What really comes up for me is that the biggest fear of all is our fear of death.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's the culture around not bringing the children to the funeral, not talking about death and what happens next, not even thinking about your own death or how you're going to impact. And so that's how they get everybody. This thing is going to kill you. This thing is going to kill your family. If you don't do this, you're killing your family. There's huge fear in that. So that's where they can find your weakness, undermine that, get in and play on your deepest, darkest fear. So just as I had said earlier about talking about the real concerns or the real fears and making a plan, I think we need to talk more about death in our culture so that it's not normal, so that people go, I'm going to die. You say, okay, well, my body is going to die. And this, you know, when I was thinking this morning, what else can we talk about when we're talking about fear, you and me in this recording, I was thinking, what about people who think that they have cancer? They find a lump in their body when they're having a shower. And they're so scared of this that they don't go to the doctor. They don't get it checked out. And then it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Where if they had gone when they found it, it could have gotten taken care of straight away. They might not have needed the treatment. But the fear of finding out what this is, because of it's ultimately rooted in the fear of death.
Fear of dying. And I remember years ago getting a present of a book, and I'm going to get the title wrong, but it was like The Monk and His Cat, the Dalai Lama's cat.
I know the author.
something like that.
David
but I
Mitchell,
remember reading it and how much the monks in it were so accepting of death. So accepting, and death was part of life.
Yeah.
And life was part of death. And it really made me think, you know. And even if you look, as you would know too, in the shamanic cultures and how they absolutely celebrate the transition, you know, we need to face our fears, and we have many fears, but the ultimate one, like you said, is death. And it's like the client you spoke of, you know, the fear of her dying and what that means for her child. And we avoid it, don't we? Sorry, I avoid it. Shouldn't say we all avoid it. I avoid.
No, I think we all mostly do. We all mostly do. And even when you just said it there, it's I just pointed out, Jen, you said something about it being in the past. We need to own it. It's about the I. I am afraid of dying.
Yeah.
I'm not afraid of dying. What am I afraid of? And make it about the I, and make it an individual thing. Because if you crack through the barrier that you have, or that I have, or that someone, then you make it easier for someone else to do it too.
Yeah, it's even to recognize, you know, things that we are genuinely afraid of. I am afraid of a good few things, but
we don't need to do a confessional now. It's all right.
No, don't worry. Don't worry. I'll be keeping a lot to myself. But I would always think I am afraid of going to hospital, for example, or I am afraid of drips hanging out of me.
I think there's more reasons now to be afraid of going to hospital than we knew before.
Obviously, but again, what does that ultimately mean? It's that fear of dying. It's the fear of this being over.
Mm. Ultimately,
whatever,
yes.
whatever this
But
is.
then I also think I am afraid of going to hospital links into I'm afraid of not having control over my body, of not knowing what people are doing to me. That's a fear.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that would be a
Which
fear of mine as well.
is why I think it's important, again, these new groups coming together, like the People's Health Alliance,
Yeah.
where you form your trusted relationships with people who have ways of doing things. As more and more of the truth is coming out, I'm hearing more and more about people. Now, I did mention cancer, people who've cured cancer unconventionally, let's just say, that have been killed for it,
Yeah.
that have been jailed for it, that have been hunted down and disappeared for this because of the globalists who run the world and want us to spend our life's blood, give it to them. I had a Reiki teacher who had a client who paid for her to give him lots and lots and lots of Reiki before he was having an operation because he had cancer of the bladder. So what they were going to do is take out his bladder, make a bladder out of skin from his leg or something, and replace his bladder completely. Do you know what I mean? Because they said the cancer was so deep inside that he'd never be able to clear it with chemo or radiation or any of that stuff. So she gave him, let's say, Reiki every day for 15 days before the operation. And then she said, can we just do a scan before the operation just to see what your status is before they go and open you up? He didn't have any more cancer. It was gone. But the doctors would not accept this. So they opened him up and did the operation anyway. They took out the bladder and it was completely clean. No cancer. They made the bladder from the part of his leg or wherever they were making it from. And then she gave him Reiki during the operation and after the operation. And he healed from that very big operation faster than anybody who normally heals from an operation like that. And he recovered and he was okay. But the refusal of the doctors to see what was right in front of him is also scary. And then what are they scared that they're no longer needed?
The death.
There you go.
The death again, that fear, and we need to be so aware of how the fear impacts the decisions we make. Because I'm just listening to you there, obviously I'm listening to you throughout our conversation, Abby. As you're saying things, I'm putting it back on myself, and as somebody who does suffer from the fear, and I would use the word suffer, I work very hard at naming my fears, really naming them. So, a fear will come up to me, or it's not a thought, by the way, it's a physical reaction I get. I actually feel the fear, or I feel unwell, or I feel really anxious. I would describe it as the bad butterflies. It's not the happy
Okay.
woohoo. I describe it as the bad butterflies, almost making me want to, just hold my breath. And to look at that, and even in the work I do, to really look and name what the fear is. So that, like you said earlier, when you name something, you can then change the fear into something that you're concerned about, and you can do something about it. Because isn't generally the fear something about the future? Isn't it generally?
Mm.
That'd be fair to say.
Yeah.
Ish. But it's usually a fear of something that is about to happen, or something that might happen, or something that
Something
could
that might
happen.
happen or something that could happen. Exactly.
Yeah, so it's future based. It's future based. And if we look at how we can help ourselves and how we can help other people, there is so much to be said for right here, right now, in this moment. So if I was to say to myself, it's like when I was talking about being stopped and being interrogated, and different things I experienced, or being turned away from places that I have always, little businesses that I'm a big supporter of small businesses, Abby, particularly businesses run by women as well. But I got turned away from some of the businesses that I had always spent money in and supported. And that really hurt me just as a human being. But also gave me the fear then saying, oh my God, am I never going to be able to do this again? Am I think the future? Am I never going to be able to do this again? Am I never, all the future, the future, the future. So yeah, I would agree with what I said earlier, that the fear is around possibly the future. But when we bring ourselves back to right now, and sometimes that I would do that when I'm working with clients, and you know, we would know kind of the whole mindfulness side of things, but just the very basic level of, you know, what are you in contact with right now? So my knees are touching the side of my chair. What can you smell? I have lovely oil burners going in here at the moment. The temperature of the air on my face. What sounds can I hear? How's my breathing? Listen to my breathing. And if I'm very anxious, that mightn't be an option. So it's easier sometimes is counting my breathing. 1, 2. Because when the fear takes over, we need a tool or tools just to allow us come back to the moment so we can then tackle the fear. You can't tackle the fear when you're overwhelmed and gone off into the future and you're up the walls and climbing the walls. And I have found, and I've learned through a very good friend of mine, and I'm continuing to learn through a very good friend of mine, how important it is to bring yourself back to right here and right now. Because right here and right now, I'm sitting in a lovely room, Abby. It's lovely and cool. I'm not melting outside in the sun. Nunu, one of my dogs, looks so funny. He's on the other chair over there. He's absolutely KO'd, living his best life. Everything's good right now. Everything is good right now. However, if I start to let my mind go too far into the future about what might happen in the winter, what might be brought in, that kind of thing, I can start to feel
powerless.
The bad butterflies. I can start to feel anxious. And I'm no good to anybody when I feel like that. But most importantly, I'm no good to myself when I feel like that. Because my day then revolves around my anxiety or my fear. And I have found it so empowering to bring myself back to this moment. And sometimes that's by clapping, just to try. Oh, there's Nunu. The dog just jumped out of his chair there. It's like that touch, that tactile, you know, to pick something up, to really keep myself grounded in the present moment. And when fear overtakes you, I think it's really important to step aside and take those few moments to breathe, to notice, what do I hear? What do I feel? What can I smell? What's my body in contact with? So that you can actually give yourself a moment to then go into what you had mentioned earlier, which is, okay, so this fear, so let's just call it a concern now, this concern of mine. Okay, so what plan can I put in place so I'm better equipped to deal with that? If it happens, or if it's inevitable, but if it happens, what plan can I put in place? Because it's about helping ourselves and helping each other manage these fears, particularly the ones that are being thrown at us. You know, I almost feel sometimes that I'm being assaulted, literally, you know, that I am just, things are just hitting me. And I'm like, please just stop. Just, you know, that old thing of leave me alone. Blah, 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 blah. I don't want to hear this. And yet, for quite a while, I was afraid of social media.
Yeah.
So I'd be afraid to go into the news feed. So I would be very tentatively, I'm doing expressions with my hands again, sorry. I have a face for radio.
No, I think this is working really well. I'm going to stop you just for a second because what you're saying is so important. And the exercise that you just did there, the mindfulness exercise, you know, if you don't know how to do that exercise when you're feeling good, then you're not going to be able to do it effectively when you're not feeling good.
Yeah.
And I really want to make that point to all the listeners, that this is why mindfulness practice is so important, because it's like a dog that's badly trained, your brain.
Mm-hmm.
And when you train a dog who's already hyper, it's not going to work. But if the dog is placid and sitting on the chair and looking for entertainment, then you can train the dog. So you train your mind so that you are in control of your own thoughts when you're in a good place. Because then when you're in a bad place, you catch it, you go, okay, I need to pull myself in the present moment. Part of you goes, oh yeah, I know how to do that.
Exactly. It's a skill. It's a skill. And I remember years ago kind of saying, oh, I can't do all that meditation, carry on, and all that mindfulness lark. Sure, my head is racing all the time. But it's a skill that we learn. And how do we learn anything? It's by repetition. And It's about involving yourself in it daily. It's like daily practices, and which at a time would really have put me off saying, oh God, I have to do this every day. But if we break it down and make it really simple, sometimes it's lying in bed at night. And when you're lying in bed, turn off all of your devices and just look up at the ceiling. And as you're looking up at the ceiling, this is sometimes something I do. Particularly if I've had a rough day. So if I'm not feeling good when I'm lying in my bed, for whatever reason, I will do what I call the faces. And I'll breathe and I'll ask myself, how are you, Marie? How are you? It's a question I ask lots of other people, Abby. How are you? How are you feeling? And I'll know, I'm feeling this, or I'm feeling that, or I'm feeling apprehensive, or I'm feeling angry, or I'm feeling hurt, or I'm feeling sad, whatever the feeling is. And if I lie there and I breathe, and I would start off by counting my breaths. And then by doing that, I kind of get into a rhythm. And then now naturally I stop counting, because the counting is to keep me focused on the breathing. Then I stop the counting naturally, and I move to my physical body. And we'd call this kind of scanning your body. This literally takes minutes. You can do this very effectively lying in your bed, whether it's the morning or the evening, and you kind of maybe look at it differently, whether it's the beginning of your day, at the end of your day. And I just allow my focus go to my body. And I do that by breathing into my body. So I will say, on the next breath, when I breathe in, I'm going to breathe all the way down to the soles of my feet. And I'll go, and I'll imagine that breath going all the way down to the soles of my feet. And when I breathe out, I'm breathing out from the soles of my feet. When I next breathe in, I'm breathing all the way down, to my ankles. And I just generally slowly move it up my body. So I breathe into that part of myself and I breathe out of that part of myself. And that in itself is a focus. So that keeps me in that moment focused on my body, because, our body knows everything and remembers everything. And our body is where we hold everything. And just by being aware, for me, of even the parts of my body that are tense tells me a lot about how I feel. So if I am doing my visuals again, sorry. If I'm clasping my fists, if they're really tight, that tells me things that I know about myself. If I find that my jaw is tight or clasped, there's just so much our body tells us about how we feel. And a really simple mindful exercise to do when you're lying in your bed before you get out of it, or when you get into it at nighttime, is to literally breathe into a part of your body and breathe out of that part of your body. And just do it. And start at your head, go down to your toes. Start at your toes, go up to your head. Whatever works for you. There's not like a ticky box where, oh no, you're doing that wrong. Once you are connected to yourself, you're doing it right.
You feel the shift almost right away, don't you?
Absolutely you do, because you're actually also, you're being kind to yourself. You're being kind to yourself. You're giving yourself space to breathe and recognize, hold on, I am a person. I am a person too. I am allowed to take time to say, how are you? How are you feeling? How are you doing? What are you experiencing? And let's just say after doing that, I recognize I'm really wound up, or I'm really anxious, or whatever it is. Then I move to the next part and I say, well, what did I spend my day doing today? And usually the most important question I ask myself is, who did I spend time with today?
Mm.
And that's where my faces exercise comes in. And I look up at the ceiling and I put all the faces of the people that I've encountered that day, whether it's face to face, whether it's on the phone, whether it's on social media, whatever it is. So sometimes the face on the wall is the blue and white icon that is Facebook. Do you get me? So it's up on the ceiling. And I ask myself a really simple question, because I like to keep things really simple, particularly if I'm anxious. Simplicity works. And I will say, did you raise me up today or did you drag me down? And I go through each face. And then that allows me choose, Abby. That allows me make a choice for the next day. Do I choose to give my energy to the things and people that drag me down, or the things and people that raise me up? That allows me to choose for the next day. And then when I wake up the next morning for my little mindfulness exercise in the morning, I remind myself of my faces exercise from the night before, and I make a conscious decision that today Facebook ain't getting me or whatever it is, but I think it can become overwhelming. And I'm speaking from experience that when we talk sometimes about meditation, visualization, mindfulness, you almost feel you have to read all these books to do it, and tie your legs in a knot and sit under a tree and
I know.
have no worries and no problems. By being in the world and being connected and being part of the world, you're going to experience the gauntlet of emotions, that's called being human. But
I have a good one too.
Great, yeah.
If we were to do so if the listeners were to do your mindfulness exercise in the morning and in the evening, then my one is anytime you have a cup of tea or coffee.
Okay, go on. I'll be doing this a lot.
Because the cup of tea or coffee is hot.
Yeah.
So you hold it in your two hands and you breathe for a moment and center your awareness on the heat in your two hands and the liquid that you're choosing to drink. And the problem that I have with this is that you start to really taste the liquid and then you get very fussy about what brand you're going to be drinking. But you connect with the liquid, you connect with your hands. And when you hold a cup in your hands like that, you're usually holding it in and around where your heart is. So then you connect with your heart and you breathe with your heart and you breathe with the cup before you drink it. And then you have a choice. You can make a wish to say, may I put love into this coffee, that I can drink the love, I can bring in calmness. I want to bring in peace into my body. So you can bring in peace into your cup. And then as you drink it, you feel that going into your body, through your mouth, down your throat, and into your stomach. And you take those moments to be fully present to the sensation of it instead of just drinking and running. Because we always run to the next thing, run to the next thing, run to the next thing. And then something gets you by the side and then you're stopped and then you're back into fear. So fear is a real thing. So we're going to need to wrap this up because we've been talking for ages, but I'm having you back on the podcast again. But I'm going to give my idea of what we need to do, and then you give your idea of what we need to do, because fear is a real thing. And from what we've both been talking, I'm sure anyone listening has been going in their own mind and questioning fear and what they're afraid of. We need to talk about the things that make us afraid with somebody that lifts us up.
Yes.
When we're not feeling fear, because we go off to a different place when we're in fear. We need to practice those mindfulness techniques when we're not in fear, so that we know what to do when we are in fear. So those would be my two. What would you add to that?
I have in the back of my diary, I have to live my life by my diary. I always have. It tells me where I have to be and when. And if I can't find my diary, I may talk about the fear. I know I'm supposed to
I'm
be
not
somewhere.
saying nothing. I'm not saying nothing.
I have in the back of my diary a yellow post-it. I'm going to have to hide my diary after sharing this information, but I have a post-it in the back of my diary. And on that post-it, it's a big one, I have the names of people who are in my tribe. So when I get overwhelmed with the fear, or when that happens, I can feel isolated or I can feel alone, I go to the back of my diary and I read out loud the names of the people who I know get me. You're on the list, Abby, as are many other people. Because when that list started, I think probably Damo was and Marley were the only people on the list. I would just like to put out there as well to everybody, there's lots and lots of people on my list. And it's a wonderful resource for me when I feel anxious or apprehensive to know that I have lots of people in my tribe. A bit like the faces on the ceiling. So I take the ones that raise me up. And like you spoke there, it's so important to connect with the people who make us feel good and to discuss our fears. We'll talk about discussing our fears and turning them into concerns, because I really like that you said that earlier. I think that's really, really effective way of looking at it. But that would be something that I would encourage people to do, to write their list of the people who they know who get them, because it can be very difficult when you're in a dark place to remember that, to remember, you know, who's got your back, or who gets you, who understands what's happening too, and that you're not alone, that you're not going crazy, that, you know, there are many people and so many people that I love, admire and respect that are on my list. There's a few animals on my list as well, because they raised me up too. You know, Catty Mac Cat, one of my cats.
And don't forget Maureen. Was that her name?
Oh yeah, the snail. God help us with the snails in my house. But I think that's a really important part with fear. Is something else that is important. And I like to practice what I preach. I try to anyway. I try my best. Is I go to therapy. I go to therapy. I am a psychotherapist. That doesn't mean anything about in terms of, oh, so I'm sorted and I have it all together. Absolutely not. I'm a work in progress like everybody else on this planet. And I really invest in therapy for myself because it helps me. It helps me look at my fears. It helps me identify which of my fears, as we talked, are real fears, which are imagined fears, which are childhood traumas being triggered. You know, fear is multifaceted, as we know. So I go to therapy and it helps me. And therapy can be different things to different people. You know, I see a psychotherapist. But there's other things that I do that help me connect to myself. Like I love massage, receiving massage. And it really helps me connect back to myself, because even whilst I'm having a massage, I find my head slows down, the busyness slows down. I can go more into my body.
Yeah.
So it's about finding, I would encourage people to find whatever therapy. I mean, therapy can be taking your shoes off and walking in the grass. And I mean, as you know, Abby, I mean, there's scientific evidence that will tell you that walking in the earth and touching the earth and the soil and connecting to that really helps lower anxiety. I mean, that, and do it, and you'll experience it for yourself. But for everybody out there to find 3 therapies or things that help them connect better to themselves so that they can silence the outside noise. 3 things that really, really help you. Another thing that helps me is water. So that could be a bath, that could be a shower, that could be jumping into the sea. Water helps. Do you know what it helps? I love the feeling of doing, wait, I call it a Geronimo, because that's what we used to do as kids, just Geronimo, and you just do a burner straight into the sea and in you go and off you go. That shock of that cold water, I find that it wakes me up.
Yeah.
It wakes me up.
Your brain, it resets you.
Yeah, it's like, oh, it's okay. I'm okay again. You know, so find the things that wake you up, find the things that help you reset. And don't just find them, do them, partake in them, be active in managing your own fears so that you can turn them into manageable concerns. because being frozen by the fear is not fun. Being frozen by the fear just stops you living your life, and that's not okay.
Yeah. So let's take our power back and not be afraid to do our personal work. I think there's been a lot of people who are afraid to go to therapy. That's why I wrote The Inner Compass, my trilogy, because she's a therapist in training, my main character. So you get to see what therapy is and what it isn't. And if you read the novels, you know, it's really important.
Really important for people to do at the moment, is to really understand, like you said, what therapy is and what therapy isn't.
Yeah.
And the inner compass and the inner work, that's what will set us free.
Definitely.
That's what will set us free.
It's funny because Marissa is the main character in the novels, and she does those mindfulness things, and she has low-level anxiety. She's doing all her training.
Is she me?
So everybody could live vicariously through Marissa until they feel ready to do it for themselves. If you needed to feel what that feels like, to go through that, it's all there. And yeah, definitely. And always know you're not alone. Have your list of people, have your list of first aid things that I do when I'm not feeling good.
Yeah, that's vital. And I get reminded of that when I go to therapy, and when maybe there's times where I'm going through something and I forget what it is that helps me connect to myself. My therapist helps me remember.
Yeah, because that freezing part is the freezing where we just can't, we're not in the moment, we're out of our body. No, so if we know we do that, if we know that we do that, then we can put things in place for when we do it to help us come out of it.
The plan. All about putting together plans that support you, and plans, because ultimately nobody knows you better than you know yourself, of course. And like you said, it's important to be in a good space when you put these plans together, so that you have something there to fall back on. It's kind of common sense, right? But fear strips us of our common sense a lot of the time.
It does. Look, I'm going to have to wind it up, but it's been amazing chatting with you again, Marie. I'm going to put all your links and everything
Abby,
beside the podcast, and everyone will find it. And I'm going to put this out as soon as possible, because I think it's really important. I think we started off with fear. We brought up the fear. We talked about the fear. We faced our fears, and then we've given really practical things that people can do around it. And you're a wealth of knowledge, and I think you're a brilliant person, and I'm looking forward to seeing you very soon, and we'll talk again.
We'll chat to you soon. Thanks so much for having me.